They're so impressed. My girlfriend said after sending my private pictures to 7 people including her exes to make them jealous. I said, those were private, walked away, and called the one person I trusted. At her brand event 2 weeks later, she saw him remove a white envelope. Her smile froze in place. I accidentally sent your private pictures to my group chat to make my exes jealous, Amber said, still smiling. They're so impressed. The worst part wasn't that she shared the pictures. The worst part was that she said they're so impressed like she'd won something. And it took me a second to realize I was the prize she'd given away. By the time that sentence finished landing, I had already decided something. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't need to. What happened next took 2 weeks to set in motion and about 12 minutes to complete. But the story doesn't start there. It starts 14 months earlier, in a friend's apartment, at a birthday party I almost didn't go to. Riley Cooper threw the party in her apartment on the east side of Portland, about 30 people, somebody's playlist going too loud in the kitchen. Amber Collins was near the drinks table when I got there, phone already out, angling her cocktail glass toward the window light above the sink. She adjusted the frame twice before she was satisfied. It was a small thing, the kind of detail you notice once and file away. We started dating about 6 weeks after that night. Amber was quick-witted in the way of people who think fast under social pressure, and genuinely funny, the kind of funny that made you feel like she'd saved the best material for you. She ran a lifestyle account on Instagram with around 60,000 followers at that point, built over 3 years by being warm and direct in a way that made people come back and actually talk to her in the comments. I respected the work. She had a real gift for it, and building that kind of audience from nothing takes something real. The first time something sat wrong was around month 4. We'd driven out to Cascade Locks on a Sunday morning, one of those clear Pacific Northwest days when the Columbia Gorge looks almost theatrical, and I turned away from the viewpoint to find Amber already pointing her phone at me without asking. I hadn't posed. She posted it to her story about 40 minutes later. When I asked her to take it down, she laughed. Babe, you literally cannot see your face. The photo ran the full 24 hours and expired on its own. The second incident was subtler. Amber had a habit of recording short voice memos for her followers while we were still at the dinner table, phone held low against her palm, narrating the food or the atmosphere, wrapping up before the main course arrived. I brought it up once, a few months in. She said, "That's literally my job." I said okay and didn't raise it again. By month 14, I had stopped raising most things. That Thursday evening, I got back from a run and heard laughter from the living room before I finished opening the door. Amber and her friend Kayla were on the couch when I walked in, Kayla holding Amber's phone out between them, both of them leaning towards something on the screen. Amber looked up when the door opened. She was still smiling. "Oh my God, come here," she said. "You have to look at this." I set my keys on the counter and crossed the room. Kayla angled the phone toward me. The screen showed a group chat. The name at the top read X-Files, and the message thread was full of thumbnails I recognized before my brain had fully processed what I was looking at. Photos I had sent to Amber, not from a shoot, not from any public occasion, private pictures. The kind you send to one person because you trust them with the version of yourself that doesn't perform for anyone. "I accidentally sent your private pictures to my group chat to make my exes jealous," Amber said, still smiling, like she was finishing a story she'd been looking forward to telling. "They're so impressed." I didn't move. I held my hand out and she placed the phone in it without hesitating because she still hadn't registered that anything was wrong. I scrolled up through the thread slowly. 7 members in the group. She had named it herself, curated those 7 people herself. The timestamps showed the photos had gone out about 40 minutes before I walked in. There were reaction emojis underneath fire icons, a raised hand. There were names I recognized from things Amber had mentioned in passing over the past 14 months. Men she had dated before me, men she still kept loose contact with. I handed the phone back. "Those were private," I said. "I know, but babe, they're not bad pictures." She shifted on the couch, finally picking up something in my voice. "You look incredible in every single one of them." I was literally just showing off my boyfriend. It was supposed to go to Kayla only, and I hit the wrong button. It was an accident. That last part was true, I thought. Hitting the wrong button was an accident. The photos themselves had been saved without my knowledge. She hadn't taken those. I had sent them to her, one at a time, over the course of our relationship, because I trusted her with them. Kayla stood up quietly, collected her bag from the floor beside the couch, and said something about needing to get going. Amber walked her to the door. When Amber came back, I was still standing in the same spot with my phone in my hand. "You're not seriously this upset about it," she said. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "I'm going to shower." I picked up my phone and walked to the bedroom and closed the door. I wasn't angry. That word came later and still didn't quite fit. What I was, standing in the bathroom with the water running, was completely still, the particular stillness that comes when something is confirmed rather than revealed. By the time the shower was done, Amber was in the kitchen starting dinner like the conversation hadn't happened. I sat on the edge of the bed and called Nathan Brooks. Nathan and I had shared an apartment for 4 years at the University of Oregon, him in pre-law, me spending most nights debugging the first applications I was convinced were going to make me rich before I turned 22. He was practicing civil litigation now at a small firm in the Pearl District, and he'd had dinner with Amber and me enough times over the past year to know her name, her laugh, and the precise way she managed to redirect any conversation back to her audience numbers. I wasn't calling him as a lawyer. I was calling him because he was the person I trusted most to tell me honestly whether I was overreacting. I talked for about 8 minutes without interruption. When I finished, there was a pause on the line, and then Nathan said, "Scott, what you're describing, depending on the nature of those photographs, may fall under Oregon's non-consensual intimate image sharing statute. This isn't just a relationship problem." I sat with that for a moment. He asked me to forward anything I had in writing. I opened Amber's text thread while he was still on the line. She had sent me 2 messages since I'd closed the bedroom door and started scrolling back through the past few hours, looking for what I needed. That was the moment I understood this was no longer a conversation I was going to have with Amber. Nathan reviewed everything I sent him over the next 48 hours and called me Saturday morning with a 1-line assessment: "You have a case." We agreed to move forward. Nathan drafted the formal legal notice and handled the procedural steps from his end. I didn't tell Amber. She had sent me 3 texts and left 2 voicemails in that window. I hadn't responded to any of them. I went back to work. A sprint deadline was coming, and there was something almost useful about code review in those days, the kind of task that occupies exactly the bandwidth that doesn't leave room for anything else running underneath it. Midweek, I ran the river trail I'd mostly stopped using once Amber and I began spending our evenings together. The path was quiet in the early morning. I had forgotten it had always been quiet. I wasn't counting down to anything. I was simply waiting for Nathan to confirm we were ready, and in the meantime living the ordinary hours of a week that looked the same from the outside as every other week. Amber had spent 14 months carefully building an online persona around images she controlled. She had no idea that the one image she wouldn't be able to manage would be her own face standing at the center of a room full of people she'd spent years trying to impress. 2 weeks after that Thursday evening. Friday night, 7:30. The Volta launch event was on the 6th floor of a converted warehouse in Portland's Central East Side. Exposed ductwork painted matte black overhead. String lights strung at slight diagonals across the ceiling in a way that was almost but not quite symmetrical, which somehow made it look more intentional. About 40 people moved through the space: content creators, brand representatives, 2 photographers doing documentary coverage of the evening. Along the far wall, a large white backdrop printed with the Volta wordmark had been positioned for photo opportunities, and a low table beside it held skincare samples arranged by someone who had thought carefully about the arrangement. Amber was stationed directly in front of that backdrop, tripod at eye level, phone mounted, filming a talking head segment to camera. She had found the best light in the room, and she knew it. Nathan came out of the elevator at 7:52. He was in a charcoal suit, not dark enough to read as funereal and not light enough to read as social, occupying the specific register of institutional authority. He moved with the unhurried precision of someone who has already determined the outcome of the next several minutes and is simply present to execute it. 2 women near the drinks table glanced up and back to their conversation. A photographer with a Canon around his neck tracked Nathan for 3 or 4 seconds before deciding he wasn't a subject. He was right that Nathan wasn't a subject. He was wrong about what Nathan was. A young woman in a Volta lanyard stepped into Nathan's path midway across the room. "Hi, are you on the guest list?" Nathan reached into his jacket without breaking stride and placed a business card in her hand. "Nathan Brooks, Brooks and Whitfield," he said. "I have business with one of your attendees. It won't take long." She looked at the card, looked at him, and stepped to the side. Amber saw Nathan from about 15 feet out. In the first moment, she didn't place him. She was mid-sentence when she noticed him some talking point about the event, captured for her followers, Her voice in the practiced register she used for that kind of content. Her thumb was on the pause button. She didn't press it. She registered a face moving toward her with a purpose she couldn't categorize and offered the professional half-smile she kept ready for anyone who might be worth knowing. The smile was automatic, reliable under uncertainty, completely practiced. It lasted about 2 seconds. Then she placed him, Nathan Brooks, Scott's college friend, the one who had come to dinner twice and asked questions about her content strategy she had found either interesting or mildly irritating depending on her mood. The professional smile didn't collapse. It froze, held in position by habit while something behind her eyes ran a calculation that came back wrong. Then Nathan reached into the folder under his arm and produced a white envelope. And what happened to Amber's face in that moment was something I've tried to find the right word for since and haven't quite managed. Not fear exactly, but the precise expression of someone who has just understood that the story they thought they were telling is actually being told by someone else. Nathan stopped at the table beside her tripod. "Amber," he said. His volume was exactly that of a professional conversation, quiet enough to be private, not quiet enough to be secret. "I represent Scott Phillips. I think you know why I'm here." He set the envelope on the table. "This is a formal legal notice under Oregon's non-consensual intimate image sharing statute, along with a cease and desist regarding any further distribution of my client's private materials. You have 15 days to respond through counsel." Amber's voice came out quieter than her usual register. She was aware, I think, of the people near the backdrop. "Can we go somewhere a little more private?" "Everything that needed to be private," Nathan said, "was made public by you." Amber's mouth opened and then closed. Whatever she had been preparing to say, she didn't say it. 3 feet to Nathan's left, a woman I later found out was part of a Portland creator collective Amber worked with had stopped moving entirely. Her name was Cassidy. She had a drink in her hand and she didn't raise it again. She wasn't recording. She was simply still, and in that corner of the room, her stillness was the loudest thing. Nathan opened the folder and removed a second sheet, a printed screenshot, color, on standard paper. He smoothed it flat on the table beside the envelope with one hand and left it there. It was Amber's text to Qley. Her words, her timestamp, her name at the top of the thread. "OMG Qley, he has no idea I screenshotted these last month. Just sent them to the whole group on accident, LOL." A woman in a blazer with a Volta badge had walked over from near the product table during the last 30 seconds of this exchange. She looked at the papers on the table, then at Amber, then at nothing in particular. Nathan addressed her briefly. "Nothing that affects your event," he said. He closed the folder and picked it up. "Everything that needed to happen here has happened." He turned and walked back toward the elevator at the same measured pace he had arrived at. Amber did not call after him. She did not reach for her phone. She stood at the Volta backdrop, the white wall behind her, the string lights overhead, the tripod she had set up in exactly that spot because the light was exactly right with the legal notice and the screenshot of her own message lying on the table beside her. Cassidy hadn't moved. The Volta representative was still standing there, looking at the papers. Amber stood very still. "Nathan texted me at 8:14. Done. She has the notice." 12 minutes after that, a message came in from Riley. "Hey, I was at the Volta thing tonight. Are you okay?" Amber looked like she'd walked into something she didn't see coming. I read both messages and set my phone face down on the desk. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't close to satisfaction. It was something quieter, the sound a room makes when you finally switch off a machine that has been running in the background so long you'd stopped noticing the noise. I had spent the 3 days after the confrontation moving my things out of the apartment, Amber, and I had shared not all at once, just a box or 2 each evening after work. The way you handle something when you don't want to turn it into an event. The studio I was renting now was on the 3rd floor of an older building near the Hawthorne Bridge, small enough to keep clean in under an hour. I replied to Riley, "I'm okay, thank you for letting me know." I replied to Nathan, "Thank you." Then I opened my laptop, pulled up the project I had been working on before any of this started, and kept going. Amber started posting to her stories the following morning. The first was a graphic cream background, soft serif font that read, "Some people can't handle being loved too hard." She followed it that afternoon with a voice memo recorded without video, just her voice, telling her followers she was navigating something difficult and was grateful for her community's support. By Sunday evening, there was a third post, "I know my truth. That's enough." Her followers had no context. In the absence of context, they filled the space with their own hundreds of supportive comments from people with no information about what they were defending. Riley mentioned it to me. I didn't look at any of it. What Amber didn't know was that Dylan Hartwell had already called Nathan. Dylan had dated Amber for about 8 months, 2 years before I met her. He was the first name I'd recognized when I scrolled the group chat the night of the confrontation. Once he understood that a civil attorney had filed a formal legal notice and that the full chat history could surface in proceedings, he reached out to Nathan's office directly, without telling Amber. He offered the complete screenshot record of the group chat, every message and every timestamp, in exchange for a written guarantee that he would not be named in any civil filing. Nathan documented the agreement. The terms were straightforward. The screenshots went further than what I'd already sent Nathan. They included Amber's messages to the group written before the photos were sent and after. One of them read, "TyBH been wanting to show you guys these for months. The accident was good timing LOL." That single line ended whatever remained of the wrong button defense. Amber was still posting on Monday morning, still framing herself as someone who loved too hard and was being misunderstood for it. She had no idea that the man she'd most wanted to impress the night she sent my photos was the one who had handed the evidence to Nathan's firm, and that he hadn't given her a second thought when he made that call. I was at my desk on a Wednesday morning, about 10 days after the Volta event, running a build test that was going to take 4 minutes regardless of how many times I refreshed the progress bar, when my phone lit up. It was a text from Riley. "Hey, random question. Did you know Amber was supposed to be in the Volta Spring lookbook? I just heard they went with someone else. She was at that event specifically to pitch for that campaign." I read it twice. Riley had heard it from a photographer they both knew, someone who had done a shoot for Volta the previous week, and mentioned offhand that the original creator lineup had been revised. Riley wasn't connecting it to anything I'd done, just passing along information the way people do when they sense it might matter but aren't sure why. I typed back, "I didn't know that." Then I set the phone down and watched the progress bar for a moment. The Volta campaign was what Amber had been building toward for weeks before everything happened. She'd mentioned the brand twice that month, told me she was going to pitch herself as someone who could reach the demographic they were after. She'd spent close to 90 minutes the weekend before the launch deciding what to wear. She had chosen that event deliberately, not only because Volta had real investment behind it, but because 2 of the men she'd dated before me were following the brand's account. She had mentioned that to me once, about 6 weeks before the event, framing it as industry awareness. I had nodded and not thought about it again until that Wednesday morning. She had shared my photos to make those men think more of her. The consequence wasn't something I had arranged. Nathan had filed a legal notice, nothing more. But someone at Volta had seen what they saw and made their own decision. Riley texted again 2 minutes later, "You okay?" "Yeah," I wrote back. "Getting some work done." I meant it. On a Tuesday morning about 3 weeks after the Volta event, I woke up before my alarm. Something about the angle of light through the blinds in the new apartment, and instead of going back to sleep, I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window while it brewed. The building across the alley had a brick wall with a water stain, shaped like something I couldn't quite identify, a rough continent, maybe, or a river delta seen from above. I'd been in the apartment for nearly a month. It was the first time I had stood still long enough at the window to notice it. My Minolta film camera was on the bookshelf in the other room. I had bought it 2 years ago and used it fairly regularly until sometime in the 2nd or 3rd month with Amber, when I gradually stopped, not because of any specific reason, just because shooting film is a slow and private act, and there was always a phone around and an audience available. I hadn't consciously decided to stop. I had simply stopped. I picked it up. There were still 13 frames left on the roll. I didn't know when I was going to use them, but the roll was mine. The frames were mine. The deciding when mine alone. I was at the kitchen counter 6 weeks after the Volta event when Nathan called. The settlement had moved forward cleanly. Amber had retained a lawyer who made contact with Nathan's office within the 15-day window, and the 2 sides had been in correspondence since. Nathan was calling to tell me it was nearly done. "She's agreed to the terms," he said. "No contest on the cease and desist. The civil claim resolves with the signed agreement." He paused, and then he told me the rest of it. Her follower count had dropped from 83,000 to around 71,000 over the past 6 weeks. A creator accountability page in the lifestyle niche had gotten hold of some of the screenshots. Nathan didn't know the exact path they'd traveled, but once they circulated, they moved quickly. 3 weeks ago, Amber had posted a taking a break from the internet to focus on myself story. That kind of post functions as its own event regardless of how it's framed. The Volta campaign had launched the previous week. Amber was not in it. One more thing, Nathan said. She called me directly about a week ago. Asked whether there was any path to resolving this quietly, keeping it off any permanent record. I told her the terms were already set and there was nothing to revise. He was quiet for a moment. Her exact words were, "I didn't know he'd actually do something about it." I didn't say anything. Nathan waited. "That's when I knew she'd gotten there," he said. I was still at the counter. I had a mug of coffee I'd poured about 15 minutes earlier. I set my hand flat on the counter surface for a second, not a gesture, just a weight placed and then released. Dylan Hartwell, the first name I'd recognized when I scrolled the group chat 6 weeks ago. The man Amber had most wanted to impress the night she sent my photos. The one whose name she'd mentioned first, when she explained why she'd chosen those particular 7 people, had been the one to hand Nathan the evidence that removed any remaining doubt about intent. He had done it to protect himself. He had not thought about Amber at all when he made that call. If she ever found out, that single detail would have cost her more than anything Nathan had said in that rooftop room, because she had spent the whole 14 months I knew her building something she called a community, and the first one to move against her when things got difficult was the man she'd used my photos to impress. "Forward me the final paperwork when it's ready," I said. "Already drafted," Nathan said. "It'll be in your inbox tonight." I thanked him and ended the call. The coffee had gone cold. I poured it out, rinsed the mug, and made a fresh cup because the rest of the morning was still there, and it was mine to do something with. I finished the roll of film in the Minolta on a Saturday, a few frames near the river, one of the water stain on the building across the alley, one of my coffee maker on the kitchen counter because the light was coming in right. I took it to a shop on Alberta Street that does 2-day developing, paid $18, and picked up the prints 48 hours later. I stood at the counter and looked at each one. Nobody had an opinion about them but me. The following weekend, a colleague was renting a cabin about 2 hours east of Portland room for 6 or 7. He mentioned it in a message on Thursday. I said yes without asking who else was coming. I drove out Saturday morning. The trees came up on both sides of the highway the way they do on that road, and I was fine. I didn't come out of this smarter. I didn't come out with better instincts or cleaner judgment. I just stopped being the version of myself who let someone else hold on to pieces of him and hand them out to strangers without asking. Some things don't teach you. They just end. And sometimes the ending is enough.